Okay, so what we're going to do today, we'll obviously talk about pivot tables. I first learnt about them in my first national account manager role and have used them ever since. I honestly don't know how I would have done my job without them, and despite them being so incredibly useful, there's not very many people in our industry who have ever been shown how to use them effectively. So that's why I'm here, to try and take the mystery out of pivot tables for you and give you the confidence to give them a go. Believe it or not, the phrase I've heard most often when people have had the training and know how to use a pivot table is "you've changed my life." That's the name of the webinar today. It's not an over-exaggeration, so I really hope that you'll find the session useful. This is Ben. Ben's a buyer from Asda. Some of you might even know him. And he's got some questions here that you as account managers or category managers might be typically asked on a daily basis from inside your business or from your customers. There may be questions on which are your best-selling products, how those sales split across a week, how they split across the store estate, how much stock in trade you've got, percentage sales, uplifts on promotions, all those kind of questions. Whenever I've asked account managers before how long they think it might take them to answer all those questions, answers have ranged from a couple of hours to just, this is going to take me absolutely ages. Presumably at that point you pull some data from an EPOS reporting system, and then you might apply some filters, write some formulas, scroll around the page quite a lot, and it could take you a few hours to find the answers to those questions. So what I'm going to do this lunchtime is show you how we can answer these questions within a couple of minutes by using a pivot table, and hopefully, like I said, that will give you enough confidence to be able to use them in the future going forwards. So when you're faced with those questions from your buyer or from someone within your own company, you probably pull a report like this from some supermarket link type EPOS system. The data we've actually got here is for 9 different products. It's sales from 7 days of a week across 1,800 stores. So all in all, that's about 113,000 data points and 65,000 rows of data. So if the question was what was your best-selling flavour, if you know the subtotal formula, you might apply that to the description column there to find out what the sales are on each of those flavours. You might apply some filters, you might write some more formulas, and then keep a record of them in which you would compare later on. Now, a pivot table, I think the best way for you to understand is for me to give you an analogy. It's in a bit of a strange one, but I hope it will help. Hopefully you'll remember from your childhood what a kaleidoscope is. If you can't remember, then maybe the images on the screen now will give you a prompt. What I'd like you to do is imagine that each of those 113,000 rows of data that we've now pulled from our supermarket link EPOS system, each of those 113,000 rows is one of the small coloured foil pieces that's in the bottom of a kaleidoscope. So every one of those little squares is a different data point. Every time you turn a kaleidoscope, you get a different view of those coloured squares like the ones you see in the picture. So every time you turn it, the foil squares rearrange themselves and you see a different picture. A pivot table is just like that, but with data. The main difference is that you control what you're seeing because you're trying to answer a particular question, whereas in the kaleidoscope example, it's completely random. So I hope that helps a little bit, just explain what it does. So in essence, a pivot table enables you to summarize thousands and thousands of records of data onto a small one-page summary in just a few clicks of your mouse. And the name comes from the ability to be able to pivot different data. So you can look at it from one way and then another way and another way really quickly. And the power of it is limitless in terms of the functionality you can get from it. I'm going to give you a quick demonstration now. So keep watching the screen. You don't need to switch to your practice files just yet. You should be able to see on the screen now a blank pivot table. So down the right hand side you have the pivot field list, and on the left hand side here you have the blank pivot table. If I wanted to answer the question which is the best selling flavour in terms of quantity, I can find a description here from my pivot field list and pull that down into a row label. So there's all the flavours of crisps that are being sold at this particular point in time. Now I have quantity here as a value, so I'll pull that in as well. Change it to sum of. I'll explain how you do this a little bit later on. And there you can see that's the total quantity sales of each of those flavours, with the best selling volume SKU being Cool Original 200 grams. So you can see that I've not had to apply any filters, I've not had to do any calculations, and therefore I've not had any chance of getting a formula wrong. So pivot tables are actually really reliable as well. So before I go into you guys actually setting up your own pivot table, I'm going to talk to you about the data that needs to be in place for you to be able to create one. So pivot tables are best created from transactional data, which is the likes of raw EPOS particularly. If you've already got some data that's got lots of formatting in it, it's got subtotals, or it's in different tables and charts, that's really not the best time to use a pivot table. A pivot table is for when you just want raw EPOS off a system and need to get through it quickly. So in order for your pivot table to work, each of your columns within your data needs just a one cell heading. So if you look at row 1 on this slide here, you can see that all those headings on those columns are all within that cell. Because they're over 2 lines, they're not across 2 cells, so everyone needs to be in just one cell. And those are your variables from which you want to take your measurements. If you do need to change your heading and move it so that it's across 2 lines, you can either use the wrap text function, or you can press Alt and Enter, and that will allow you to type down on a second line. Dates is a really important one. When it comes to dates, a specific date, month or year is not an actual field of data. It's a data point below. So again, if you look at column E on this example here, you've got calendar date is the field at the top, and then your dates appear within the data. You wouldn't ever have the 20th of March as a field heading. If your data should be containing numeric data, so particularly when it comes to sales value and volume, you shouldn't have blank cells in there. The data should be zeros instead of blanks. It's all right for descriptions and that kind of thing to be blank. There shouldn't be any blank rows completely or blank columns, because that will upset the pivot table. It won't know what to do with that line of data if there's nothing in there. So you should ensure that there aren't any blank rows or blank columns. Again, you can see here on this slide there's no gaps in that data anywhere. If there are totals or subtotals within the data that you've got, they need to be removed. The pivot table provides all the totals that you need, so that if you've got subtotals or totals in there, they'll end up being double counted. So again, it's just the raw data that you need to have. As lots of people are working across different versions of Excel, you'll often find files open in compatibility mode. Make sure they're not in that mode and you've got one saved for the current version of Excel that you're using. A lot of the pivot tables that have come on since 2007, the functions won't work properly if they're in compatibility mode. So once you're sure that your data is right and it's in that format, you then build a pivot table, and again I'll take you through how we do that in just a moment. I just wanted to take a minute here to explain the structure of it. So you can see on the right hand side here we've got a pivot table field list, and in that list there are all the headings of the columns of your raw data. So you've got your product codes, description, store name and number and value. All the options that you could possibly want to play with are there in that field list. Then you have the choice as to how you want to lay those out. So depending on how you like to see data, how you like your columns and your rows organised, it's up to you to design. So on the far right hand side at the bottom there, you've got 4 options. You've got the report filter, the column labels, the row labels and the values. Column labels is fairly self-explanatory, and you can see on the example there I've put the calendar dates to run across the top. So you can see each of the 7 days of the week there in column labels. In row labels I've chosen to put the store name, so you can see that they run vertically down the page by putting that heading in the row labels box. Then I am looking at sales value here. So sales value goes into the bottom right hand corner box, and that's effectively what fills up your pivot table, is the value that you want to look at. So whether that's quantity, whether that's sales value, whether it's stock in trade, that will tell you for each of those numbers in that store what's happening on that day of the week. Then you've also got a report filter. So if you just wanted to look at one SKU, for example, you could put the description up in the report filter and choose then, as you would do a normal filter in Excel, what it is that you want that pivot table to contain. So what we're going to do now is open up the practice file that you've got, and we will build one together. I'm just going to check with Lorraine if there's any questions at this point.
Yep, just one, Emily. How does Excel actually deal with symbols in pivot tables? Can it take question marks, or does it have to be a 0 for a blank cell?
It wouldn't cope particularly well with question marks. It it will struggle, if you've got one question mark amongst a set of values, it will struggle to do a total for that, which might cause you problems. So yes, it's best not to have symbols within there. If you do have them, that they appear regularly in a raw data file, hopefully you may have used the find and replace function before. You could highlight all your data, tell it to find a question mark and then replace it with a 0. That would be one way of getting rid of them more quickly.
Okay, thank you. If you could all open your practice files now and just please raise your hand when you've done that. We'll give you a few seconds. Thank you. Okay, looks like most of you have got the Excel file open, so that's great. Over to Emily.
Fantastic. So if you can all make sure you're on the tab at the bottom that says EPOS data, then just make sure you have any one of the cells selected within that, just as long as you're not in one of the blank cells from column L onwards. Please make sure you have a cell selected within that data set. Right, then I want you to all follow along with me. If you could now go to the tab at the top that says Insert, so it's second from the left. I'm doing this on screen as well. If you need to flick backwards and forwards, you can watch me do it. So please click Insert top left option. Once you're in the Insert ribbon there, on the far left hand side you'll see the option for Pivot Table. If you click on that, you should now have a wizard called Create Pivot Table have appeared on your screen, and you'll see a dashed line that's right around the outside of all the data set that you've got there on that file. So you should see Create Pivot Table. It's selected the data range for you because you already had a cell selected within there, and it's chosen a default option as to where you want this pivot table to be, and it's asking, it's defaulted to New Worksheet, so please click OK. You should now have found that a new sheet has opened up and you'll have a blank pivot table like I showed you initially, so a blank pivot table to the left and the pivot table field list to the right hand side. Lorraine, would you just be able to check if everyone's got to that stage?
Okay, so a few of you are saying to me that you've got question marks in your data set. As Emily said, just use the find and replace tool and find any question marks and replace it with a 0 value. Hopefully that should fix everything for you. Apart from that, has everybody got to the point where they've created a basic pivot table? Raise your hands, please. Okay. That's about half of you. Emily, could you just repeat that process again, please?
Of course, no problem. So I'm starting on the tab that says EPOS data. I'm selecting any cell within that data set, so for example C10. Then I'm going up to the Excel ribbon at the top and I'm choosing Insert, which is the second from the left. Click on Insert and then click Pivot Table, which is the far left hand option. Excel will bring up a Create Pivot Table wizard, which highlights all the data that's on the page, and this is why it's important not to have blank rows in there, because it would stop at the blank row. So this will have selected all the data in that data set of the EPOS data tab, and it's defaulting to ask you to put that in a new worksheet. So if you click OK, you should end up with a blank pivot table on a new sheet. It'll say Pivot Table 1, in my case I've got 3 of them open now, and then a Pivot Table field list on the right hand side.
Okay, thanks Emily. A few people are still having problems with the data showing as question marks. Is there anything they can do about this? Can they paste it as values, or how do they see if they're in compatibility mode?
I don't have any question marks on the data set that I've got here, I don't believe. I just tried searching for them. If you highlight all your data, copy it and paste as values, try that one. If that still doesn't work and you're worried about compatibility mode, then go to Save As and save this file somewhere on your computer as an Excel workbook if you're using 2007 Excel onwards. So if it looks like the Excel that we're using on screen, if you save that document as an Excel workbook, you should find it's not in compatibility mode.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully everyone's got that sorted. If you're still seeing problems with your sheet, there's not a lot we can really do about it at this point, but we will be issuing the recording, so maybe try again after the session. You can still follow along with what we're doing. Otherwise, maybe you have your own set of data, or you can put some dummy data in and play around with that. So I do apologise if you're having a problem, but try the steps that Emily's explained and hopefully it'll be fine for you.
Are we able to do one more hands up just to see how many people are with us now?
Yep, are you all following along? Hands up if you're all fine. People coming in. Okay, most of you are okay now. Like I said, try and listen along and correct any problems as we go along. You still will be able to get something out of the session, so just stay with us.
Great. If your screen doesn't look quite like this one and your pivot table field list is in the middle, you can pick it up and drag it around. So if yours has actually appeared here, as you can see on the screen now, if you just want it over to the right hand side to be tidier, you can just click on it and drag it and pull it over to the right hand side. Okay, right, if everyone's got a blank pivot table, we're going to go back to Ben the buyer's questions and answer his first one. So I'm going to explain to everybody how we go about answering his first question, and we'll work through it together. So what we want to know first of all is which is the best selling flavour of crisps in terms of value sales. So you should now, if you've got your blank pivot table open, if you go over to your field list on the right hand side, click on where it says description and drag that down into the box in the bottom left hand corner there that says row labels. Then in your pivot table it should now be populated in column A with each of the different, I think 7 flavours of crisps, or 9 flavours, sorry, of crisps that are in this data set. So hopefully you'll all have those descriptions now on the left hand side in the rows. Then we're only interested in one more fact because we want to know which is the best selling flavour. We don't care at this point in which store or on which day of the week. We just want to know in totality what's the best selling in value sales. So we need to select sales value from our field list on the right hand side. So again, if you click that and pull it down into this bottom right hand corner where you've got the values box, now you will see, I'm sure, it doesn't seem to happen to everybody, but I would say 90% of cases Excel defaults for this option to be count of sales value. Count of sales value isn't particularly helpful to us, and I really wish Microsoft would change the default setting on this one. That just tells you how many data points there are within that set. What we want it to say is the sum of, so that it adds up the total value for all those flavours. So to correct that, and this is something you'll have to do very regularly, is click down here in values where it says count of sale and choose the bottom option from that menu, value field settings. You should then have this box pop up in the middle of the screen and it gives you some options. So here you can choose whether you want sum, count, average, max, min, and this is all extra functionality within the pivot table. Most commonly you'll use sum. So if you click on sum and then OK, that will now have added up the value of those sales. So I'll just tell you that one more time. If you get to in the values box, if it says count of at any point in time, the likelihood is that isn't the option you want. So click on it in the box, open up the value field settings, and make sure you have sum selected from that option. So now in your pivot table you have all the sales for that entire week and value sales for each of the different flavours. So you could pick out for yourselves there which is the biggest selling, or within the data tab you can still use the A to Z and the Z to A for sorting from smallest to largest or largest to smallest. So if we sort largest to smallest, we can see that Cool Original 200 gram is the biggest selling value line at that point in time. If you follow that through with me and you have the same answer on your pivot tables, please could you raise your hands now?
Okay, thanks guys. If you've got any questions, pop them through to chat now and we can repeat a little bit of that if you want. We've got one more question to go through with you and then we'll be getting you to do your own questions and telling us what answers you've got. So now really is the time to ask any questions that you've got. About half of you are getting the results that we've got, so I think we might go over that one again, Emily.
Yep, no problem at all. I'll start from the beginning, so I'm just going to remove these again. Okay, so if you're starting with your blank pivot table, we're going to select description from the field list on the right hand side. Click on that once and drag it with your mouse into the row labels box. So then you'll have a list of the descriptions in your pivot table in each of the different rows. Then we're interested in sales value, so we take that value from our pivot field list, again we click it and we drag it down and we put it in the values box. It defaults again to count of, so I'm going to click on that. I need to change it to sum so that it adds up all the different values that we've got within the data set. So I'm going to click on that, choose value field settings from the bottom of that list, and then change the default here to sum. So there you've got the best-selling flavour there. £85,407 is the Cool Original 200 gram. The pivot tables, you can change the format of the numbers the same way as you can in any Excel. If you have to right-click on these values, you can choose number format and choose number with commas if you want to. Makes it a bit easier to read.
Emily, a few people are saying they've lost their pivot table boxes on the right hand side. Is there a way to get them back, or is it restart the pivot table?
Oh no, there certainly is. If you click one of the cells within the actual pivot table itself on the left hand side, so if I click out of this one now and then my boxes disappear, if you click back onto your pivot table they should reappear on the right hand side. Hopefully that will solve it for you. If they don't reappear, on the top of the menu bar options, you should have now a pivot table tools. I've got it up on my screen if you want to have a look at it. A pivot table tools tab, and within it options, and then within that on the far right hand side you've got buttons for the field lists and the field headers, so if it doesn't come back automatically when you click on the pivot table you can bring it up from there as well.
That's great, thanks. I think we're going to move on to the next run through, guys. So again, any questions, let us know.
Okay, so the next question that we have from Ben, our buyer, is he wants to know what percentage of sales go through on the biggest selling day of the week. So we're not interested in any particular flavour here at this point in time, so we don't need the description within our pivot table. So to take something out of your pivot table, if you go down to the row labels box where you should have description, I'm going to click on that now and drag it back up into the field list. So you'll see that disappears from the pivot table, and all that's left is £284,000, which is the total value of the crisp sales in that week. What we're interested in for this question is the different days of the week. So what we want to be looking at this time is the calendar date. So I'm going to pull calendar date down from the field list into the row labels, or column labels, whichever is your preference. So you can see here now for each of those days of the week how many pounds worth of sales went through on each day. So again, a lot quicker than if you had to manually add up those 113,000 rows of data. I hope you'll all agree. But the question here is what percentage goes through on the highest selling day of the week. So here we've got some numbers and we know what the total for the week is. So you might be tempted at this point to start writing the formula to work out what percentage, what's our biggest selling day there. So the 21st, £63,000. You might want to manually work that out as a percentage of 284, but you don't need to. The pivot table can do it for you. So I'll just check, is everyone with me up until that point? Does everyone have the calendar days and the total sales value on their pivot table?
Again, raise hands please. Keep them coming. Brilliant, most of you with us.
Fabulous. So this is the clever bit now to save you even more time. If you right click within on one of those numbers in your pivot table, just right click and you should see this menu option come up that's on my screen now. And you'll find within that list of options you have a value field settings, which is third from the bottom. So please click on that one. And you'll see this box before where we changed from count of to sum of. There's another little tab here, so there you see summarised by on the left hand side. On the right you can show values as. If you click on there, at the moment you'll see that it says show values as normal. What normal means is if it was £2 plus £2 it would show you £4, so normal is just a straightforward calculation, what's the answer. If you click on the little drop down menu to the side of that you can see you've got some different options. The common ones you'd be likely to use are percentage of row and percentage of column. In this instance all our values are in a column and each one of those days is a percentage of that column. So if you were to choose the options show values as percentage of column and click OK, it will automatically tell you for each of those values what they are as a percentage of that weekly sales. So we can see that on the 21st of March there, the biggest selling day of the week, 22.47% of sales went through on that day without having to have done any calculations. I'll just see how you're getting on with that one and then I'll explain it again if I need to.
A few people getting different totals. Is there any reason for that, or do you think we need to go over it again to make sure that everybody has the right totals?
Different totals, right. This is an interesting one. Can everybody check that in that value section, in the bottom right hand corner, it does say sum of? If it says count of there, you will end up with a different total.
Okay, I think we're probably good to move on to the first practice question. Keep your questions coming, but hopefully you'll be able to follow along. The next one is a bit more simple than that one we've just covered, so give it a go.
So what I would suggest, first off, is remove calendar date now and sum of sales from your pivot table. So if you just click on them and drag them back into the field list, you can start again with a blank pivot table. So I'll put the questions back on the screen. The first question from Ben now is, which store sells the most cheese and onion? So we're going to give you a few minutes to go through that. Lorraine's got a poll with some possible answers, so we'd like you to answer that question when you can, and if needs be, I will explain how we do that.
Okay, guys, please let me know when you think you've got enough answers and you think you've worked out what the correct answer is. Vote on the poll. We will go over it again if you don't all know what you're doing, so don't worry. But we're just going to give you a few minutes to see if you can get the correct answer.
And then I'll do a demonstration as to how we get to that answer.
Emily, it might just be worth going over sum of sales again at some point. We've got a few people asking how they do sum of sales.
Certainly. Let me just put some values back in my pivot table. So if you have sales value or sales quantity in the bottom right hand corner box for values, and it automatically comes up saying count of, you just need to click on the box that says count of sales, and you should get a menu of options that come up. The bottom one of those is value field settings. So you click on that and the box comes up a wizard to say, do you want to look at the sum, the count, the average, etc. That's just where you need to select sum and click OK. That should change it for you.
Okay, lovely. A few people asking how can they see value and percentage? Is that possible?
That is a good question and a slight limitation. You can't see them both at the same time unless, let me just try one thing. I'm just experimenting here. Percentage of column.
It's 18% of you have voted so far, so keep going if you haven't quite got the answer yet. Pop your hand up if you don't think you can get the answer.
If you want the values and the percentages side by side, you can use the column headings that are in the field list more than once. So what you would need to do is pull sales value down a second time into values. I've got it on the screen now for anyone who wants to have a look at it. So I've got two versions. I'll just make this a bit bigger. Two versions of sales value in that values box, and on one of them I've right-clicked and changed it to a percentage of the column so you can see them side by side.
Okay, I'm going to launch the poll responses now. We are going to go over that question again, so follow along if you still haven't got the answer, okay?
Okay, right, let me just start again with this one, make it blank. Okay, so the question here is, which store sells the most cheese and onion 200 gram? So the first thing I would do in this instance is choose the store name from the field list and bring it down into a row label. If you put it on column labels, you'll be scrolling left to right forevermore. So we've got our store names here now in row labels. And we want to know which store sells the most, so I'm going to go with quantity in this case, so the most bags of crisps. I'm going to put quantity down into the values box in the bottom right hand corner. It's defaulted again to count of, so I'm going to click on it, choose value field settings and change it to sum. So this now tells us for all those bags of crisps that, for example, Fulham Road Convenience sold 59 bags of crisps in that week. However, we're only interested in cheese and onion. This is an opportunity for you to use the report filter at the top. So I'm going to bring the description field down and put it in the report filter box, which is this top left hand one. And now if you look in cell A1, if you've done that, you've got description, and then in B1 you've got a drop-down menu. So I can choose from this drop-down menu that I just want to look at cheese and onion 200 gram. So now all the values that are in that pivot table are just for the cheese and onion one. So this is all the store sales that are selling cheese and onion If I want to see which store has sold the most, again, I can use my Z to grey button to sort this list from the largest to the smallest within the Options tab. And we'll find that MK Kingston Hypermarket has sold the most bags of cheese and onion, 200 grams, during that week.
And you should see there that 95% of you got that right, so well done. The 5% of you that got the wrong answer, maybe just have a think about why that might be, type out any questions, go away and practice, and we're always happy to answer questions after the session as well. Our contact details will be on the screen at the end, so I think we'll move on to the next question now.
Okay, so the next question from our buyer is, what percentage of total value sales is barbecue? So what percentage of total value sales is barbecue? And that's the barbecue 200 gram SKU.
Again, the poll is up on the screen. Once you've had a play on your pivot table, go back to the poll, tell us which one you think is the correct answer. We'll give you a few minutes to do some working, take any questions, and then we'll move on again.
Remember to keep checking that any values you have in the values box says sum of and not count of. That one catches people out a lot when they first start working with pivot tables.
And can we run over how to get your pivot table view back again if you've lost it?
Certainly. If you just click anywhere within your pivot table, so anywhere within that left-hand side of the spreadsheet that's a pivot table, your field value list will pop up again. The way it disappears is if you click in a cell that's not included with the pivot table. So for the one that I've got on screen now, if I click anywhere from column C across, my pivot field list will disappear. If you click back within your pivot table, it will reappear, or you can go to Pivot Table Tools and Options tab at the top of your spreadsheet, and there will be an option there to show or hide the field list. If the answers you're getting don't seem quite right, remember in the previous one we did put a filter on cheese and onion, so make sure you're not still talking about cheese and onion. And think about the information that you need. Do you need all the store names in there anymore? Possibly not for this one, because we just want to know as a total percentage. So if your pivot table is looking huge and you've got loads of rows or columns in there, just think about the data that you actually need to see rather than just having a huge long list of things.
Emily, is there any limit to how many things you can see on a pivot table? Could you put all of your columns in there and manipulate it that way?
No, there isn't really a limit. As long as those options are in the field list, you can build it. If you wanted to know what which flavours sold in which stores, you can build multiple layers in. I'll just give it another couple of minutes for you to answer that one, and then I'll explain when everyone can watch.
Okay, and a few people having problems viewing a percentage. Can we run through that again?
We certainly can. So let me just change my pivot table so I've got a decent example to show you. Okay, so if you you just need to click within one of the points of data within your quantity, so one of the numbers that you've now got, presumably it will be a amount of pounds. Let me just change the value. So any of the numbers that you've got within your pivot table, if you right click on one of them, then from that menu choose Value Field Settings, which is the third from the bottom. And then you have these options of Summarize By, which we've got some of, or Show Values As. If you click on Show Values As, it's currently defaulted to normal. If you click on the drop-down menu beside normal, you'll find the options in there to show as a percentage of a row or as a percentage of the column. In the example I've got here, I want it as a percentage of the column.
Great, thanks Emily. Most of you have voted now, so hopefully most of you are okay with that question. It looks like the majority of you have got the correct answer, which is brilliant. So Emily, if we could just run over how to do that one again to make sure everybody understands why and what they're doing, that would be fab.
Certainly, I think I've just inadvertently put the answer on, which is why I hid it straight away. So I've started again with a blank pivot table. I'm going to put the descriptions again as a row label, so I'll drag that one down. And we're talking about value sales specifically, so I'll take my sales value field and put that into values. I'm going to change it to sum of to make sure we've got the right numbers. So that's how many pounds worth of each flavour are being sold. If I want to know that as a percentage, I'm going to right click within one of those numbers, go to Value Field Settings, third from the bottom on the menu, Show Values As, and change that option to a percentage of that column. And there we get barbecue is 10.68% of the value sales.
And that's what most people said. Okay, I think we've got time for one more of Ben's questions.
Okay, so just so you can have a play around with the different options, this time I want to know, or Ben wants to know, how much stock is there of salt and vinegar. So you've got a stock in trade option there. So we want to know, in terms of the number of bags of crisps, what's the total stock in trade for salt and vinegar.
Keep your questions coming. Once we've done these few and we're satisfied that everybody is kind of following along with what we're doing, we'll move on and talk you through VLOOKUPs and pivot tables and then pivot charts. You won't be doing those with us today because we are running out of time, but we'll just talk you through why you might need to use them and how you could if you needed to. Let me know if you've got any questions.
And don't forget, like I said, if you're like me and I can't read a number properly without the commas in it and the thousand separators, you can right click and change the number format the same as you would in any normal spreadsheet.
Can we just repeat the question that we're getting them to answer, please, Emily?
Yep, the question is, how much stock in trade is there of salt and vinegar?
Okay, so have a think about the labels that you need to pop on your pivot table. Do you want to give them a hint, Emily?
Again, make sure you're talking about sum of rather than count of. And it's of your field list options, it's the one that says stock in trade that you want to be using. We're not worried about stock in transit or days cover at this point in time.
Okay, brilliant. Much quicker that time. Most of you seem to have got the answer spot on, so we'll just run through it quickly again. But I think you're all pretty much comfortable with what we're doing, which is great.
Fantastic news. So yes, for that one, I'll keep my descriptions as they are. I'm just going to remove the sum of sales value from the values and replace it with stock in trade. Oh, that one's come up automatically. See, sometimes it does, but most times it defaults to count of. And there we go. For salt and vinegar, we have 481,801. Have I reached the same answer as everybody else, Lorraine?
You have 96% got the right answer.
Oh, well done. Fantastic. So what I was going to explain before, if everyone can just watch the webinar screen and the pivot table that I've got up on the screen, just to show you how you can build different levels through it. So at the moment we've got these row labels of descriptions. Now you might want to see for each of those flavours how they sell in each of the stores. So you could pull down store name and add it to row labels as well. It looks a bit messy, but there you've got barbecue 200 gram and below it all the stores and the sales for that store for that product. There's so many stores here, it's probably not a great use of time, but you can build things on. So if, again, you could put calendar date in the description so you can see the sales by day for each of those flavours. You could then put your store name across the top, maybe if you had fewer of them in your column labels. So what you've got on screen now is for each of those shops how many packets of crisps they've sold on each day of the week for each flavour. So that's just how quickly you can manipulate it to get to the level of detail that you want to get to. Now, okay, we're going to move on if everyone's happy with that. So sorry,
I was just going to get you all to pop your hands up if you're okay and submit any questions again if you need any help or was to repeat anything. So pop your hands up if you're happy for us to move on. Yep, fabulous. Most of you comfortable. That's great.
Fantastic. So there's one of Ben's questions that's not so easy to answer from the data that we've already got there. So you may have seen one of his questions was, what is the sales percentage split by store format? So I'm guessing you all work with retailers or are retailers, and quite often, a lot of the time, you'll need to know what sales are going through your convenience channel versus maybe your biggest stores. So we know that within that data from our retailer EPOS download that we've got all the store names and all the store numbers, and we could maybe go ticking through a filter trying to work out each of the different formats, but again, when you've got over 1,000 stores, that's not going to be the best use of your time. I would hope that most people, for the retailers they work with or work for, have a store list somewhere which would identify what type of store format each of the stores is. So what I was going to do now is show you how you combine the data from one place with a VLOOKUP formula to another spreadsheet that you might have to make that pivot table even more useful. Would you just put your hands up if you know and are confident with using a VLOOKUP formula?
Okay, it's about a third of people, so I think it is worth us running through this. And again, if you are confident, maybe just run through the data that we've got and do it along with us.
Great, I'll talk everybody through it. So if you can go back to your Excel files and go back to the EPOS data tab, so you should be back where your product code description and all the different fields are. So hopefully you're all on that page. We're going to add an extra column in here that says store format, and you'll see within that Excel document that you've got that there is also a tab saying store list. So if you have a quick look in there, you'll see we've got the store number, the store name, and the type of store format that it is. So what we want to do is combine these two sets of data to make that pivot table even more useful. So if you go back to the EPOS data tab, and in cell L1, I'd like you to type store format. Again, it all needs to fit within that cell. I don't want store in one cell and format in another, so just make sure you've got store format typed in cell L1. And then in cell L2, we're going to type a VLOOKUP formula. VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup, and how it works is it says we tell it which point of data we want it to look up. In this case, we're going to tell it to look up the store number. So in this first row here, in row 2, we've just got the store number of 2001. So we're going to tell Excel to look up that number, 2001. We're going to tell it to go to the store list tab, and that it will find that number somewhere within column A. So, you know, there's 1,800 shops in there. The formula will find within that column the, 2001 store number. Then we need to give it instructions, say when you find that number, what do we want it to return? In this case, we want it to return the value that's in column C. So we want to know for that store number what is the format of that store, which is in the third column along from where it will find the number. So please stick with me. I'll tell you exactly how to type the formula, and I'll do it myself as well. So you can either watch the first time, and then a second time I'll go through and talk you through how to do it yourselves. So we go back to our EPOS data tab, go to cell L2, and the formula starts equals V for Victor, and then the word lookup, all one word, equals VLOOKUP. Then we open the brackets. Now you can see the prompt there is asking you for a lookup value. So what is it that we want Excel to find? And therefore you click the cell C2, which has got the first store number in it of 2001. So we click on that cell. Then we use a comma. Then I need to tell Excel where it's going to find the number 2001. So then I click on the store list tab. I'm just going to highlight the whole of column A because it could be anywhere within that column. So I'm going to click where it actually says A and highlight that column. And then I'm going to drag it across so that it's got all 3 of those columns of data included. So we tell it we find it in column A, and then it could return anything as far as C. We then press comma again, and we need to tell it how many columns along from the store number it will find the information that we want. So if the branch number there is our first column, then the store format is in the third column, so we type the number 3, and then a comma, and then the word false. I can't imagine a circumstance in which you would ever want an approximate match for a number. Something like this is very precise, and I've never used a VLOOKUP with true, so we'd type false at the end of that formula. And close the brackets. And when you hit return, it should take you back to the EPOS data tab, and you'll find that the 2001 store is an SO convenience.
Hands up if everyone's okay with that. Just while we're waiting for you to vote, Emily, somebody has asked, does it have to reference a tab on the sheet you're working in, or can it reference something on another spreadsheet, an external sheet?
Yeah, it's absolutely fine to reference it. So if you've got that store list saved in another part of your computer, then exactly the same. As long as you open it, click it, and select the right columns, then no, it doesn't have to be within the same worksheet.
Okay, about half of you are okay with that, so I think we'll just go over it again to make sure everybody understands what they're doing.
Perfect. Okay, so if you're with me, we'll start from cell L2 on the EPOS data tab. Start by typing equals, and then VLOOKUP, VLOOKUP. So that's telling us which formula we want to use. We'll then open the brackets, a regular curved bracket. We then need to tell Excel what it is that we wanted to look for. So we select the cell C2, which has got the store number in it. Hopefully you're all there now. We then need a comma to tell it what to do next. Now it's going to find that store number within the store list, which is on a separate tab. So still within that formula, if you click on the store list tab at the bottom, and then you can either highlight all of column A to C, as I've just done, or if you're more comfortable with it, you can highlight physically from A1 to C, whatever is at the bottom of that list. Sometimes I think it's easier just to do the full column, and then you're sure you never miss anything, even if you add something new in. So highlight all of columns A to C, and then hit comma again. And then we need to count the number of columns away from where it finds the store number. So if it finds the store number in column A, and what we want it to return is the format, which is in column C, that's 1, 2, 3 columns along. So we type the number 3, followed by another comma, and then the word false. And close the brackets. And we end up again with SO convenience as the store format.
Great, thanks Emily. There are loads and loads of online guides with regards to how to use VLOOKUPs, and don't forget Emily also does provide advanced training on Excel, so if you think it's something that your company could really do with learning about, then do get in contact with her. We've got about 5 minutes left, although we did start a little bit late, so we might run over a little bit, but we're just going to run you through pivot charts now.
Or just one more thing, Lorraine, on the old VLOOKUP. I'm just going to show you here. So if you've got that, a little shortcut that not everybody knows. If you watch the screen that I've got here and double click on the bottom right hand corner, you'll see there's a little black box appeared there on the bottom of L2. If you double click that, that will then drop your formula right down. So for every single data point in there, we now have a store format included in it. So we want to get this into our pivot table. So I'm going to go back to my pivot table and just get rid of some of these. So I'm back to here, descriptions by stock in trade. But you'll see that store format hasn't appeared in my pivot field list on the right hand side here, but we want to incorporate it. So if you've done that and you've added some new data to your raw data and you want to add it to your pivot table, you see at the top of the screen you've got pivot table tools, options and design. If you click on options, then you have an option here for changing the data source. If you click on that, it will take you back to your raw data tab, and you'll see the dotted line is showing you which data is included in the pivot table. You can see that in this case store format isn't included, so we need to make sure that is included. If you hold down the Shift key, which is bottom left hand corner of your keyboard, just above the Control key, if you hold down that and press the right arrow, it will also incorporate that extra column, and if you click OK, it'll take you back to your pivot table, and you'll see you've now got store format as an option within the field list. So just a quick run through on that one again. If you've got any new data, you just need to go back to your pivot table, go to the Options tab at the top, change data source, and just make sure all the columns that you want included are selected within your pivot table. Then you will get the options up on the right hand side.
Okay, any questions at this point, guys? Few people asking, can you have the same store number twice?
I'm not sure I understand exactly what the question means, but within that EPOS data, these stores each appear 7 times, for 7 days a week and for 9 flavours. So within that data set, yes, the store number will appear a lot, and it will look up to the store format each time. I can't imagine a situation where you'd have 2 unique stores with different numbers, so I think that's probably what's meant by that question.
Lovely, thank you. And can you just run us over how to quickly copy the VLOOKUP down into all of the cells again?
Of course. Okay, so if you're back in cell L2 where you've got that first formula, I imagine quite a lot of people would then take that cell and drag it down, which again can take quite a long time when you've got so many rows. So if you actually have selected the cell L2, you should see that in the bottom right hand corner of that cell there is a little black box. If you hover your cursor over that, you change to a small black cross. When that happens, double click it, and it will take that formula down, all the way down to where there's a gap in the column on the left hand side. Okay, right then, so very quickly before we finish, I just wanted to introduce you to the idea of pivot charts. If you're like me and prefer to see things visually than just lots and lots of numbers, you'll like these. Here we've got, again, the row. If you look at the Excel file that I'm using, we've got the descriptions there and the number of stock in trade. We can convert this very quickly into a graph. If you're within your pivot table, you'll see there's pivot table tools, options and design tab at the top. If you go into options, you can see there's a pivot chart. You probably just want to watch me at this point rather than trying it out yourselves, as we don't have much time left. Click on pivot chart, and as you would in a normal graph in Excel, it asks you what type of chart you want. So we're just going to take a column graph in this example, and then I'm going to move it to a new sheet so you can see it a little bit better. So here it has come up with, it's converted that data into a graph so you can see the sales by flavour there. If you wanted to be able to see your sales by day of the week, you do it in exactly the same way as you would do with the pivot table. So instead of description, maybe we want to look at days of the week. So we'll take the description out and we'll put calendar date along the axis field. Now you can see your sales by day of the week. You have all the same chart options as you would normally in Excel when you're using graphs and templates, so you can change the type, you can change the colours, and you can add more things on. So there we've got sales by day of the week. If you wanted to see what that was split by flavour, then you could put description into here. That doesn't look very pretty. I'm going to change the chart type so they stack on top of one another. So there you've got sales by day by flavour. I've got a slide here for you to explain how that works. So you've got the pivot chart option up in your design tab. Basically the column labels become the legend fields of your chart, so the data series, what is it, the data that you're trying to display. The row labels become the values of your horizontal x-axis, and the values are the values on your vertical y-axis. So that's one to have a bit of a play about with on your own time. If you've understood how pivot tables work, that's just slightly the other way around. Okay, Lorraine, any more questions?
Yeah, just a few. Some people are asking, will the pivot table update if we save new data over it?
It depends how you've set the pivot table up. If you were to put new data, do you mean if you added new data onto the bottom, so if you put an extra week's sales on, depending on whether the pivot table selected all the columns or not in the first instance, or whether it just took it to the bottom row. If you add new data to the bottom, the safest thing to do is to go back into your pivot table, use pivot table tools at the top and the options tab, change data source, and just make sure that that is including all the data, including the new data. When you hit return, that will then all be included within your pivot table. As an account manager, I used to have one of these going that I updated every week, so I would just add the latest week's sales onto the bottom, and then it became my main tool for knowing what was happening in my category, you know, with a 5-minute update every week. Okay, so I think that pretty much brings us to the end of the session then, if there aren't any more questions from you guys. I really hope today to remove some of the mystery around pivot tables. I know quite often people get sent them on an email and not told how to use them, and then when things move as quickly as they do, get a bit frightened by them. So I hope that you're convinced about how useful they can be, and you've got an idea now of how to start using them. As with most things, they really do take a bit of practice before you'll master it. But remember, you have got this practice file, so if it helps to work, keep that to one side or work through it with some examples, and then that should help. My rule generally is if something in Excel seems really long-winded and complicated, and you find you have to do a lot of fiddling and write a lot of formulas, and there really is a simpler way to do it, and a pivot table is often the solution, particularly when it's around EPOS data. I do run day-long courses with all my top tips and time saving, so if you'd be interested in any kind of training for your teams, then please do get in touch. And don't forget the VLOOKUP is a really powerful function, so if you haven't quite mastered it today, there's lots of online guides, you can Google it, and there'll be lots of help available online if you want to master that one. And with the pivot table, it might get really messy and things might up in the wrong place. If all goes wrong, just delete it. As long as you don't change the raw data, your EPOS download, you can delete a pivot table just by right-clicking on the bottom of the sheet, pressing delete, and start again. So if you're getting a pickle, it really doesn't matter. They're great. You can copy and paste key extracts into other files if you need to email someone. And the main benefit for them really is that you don't need to write lots of formulas, you don't need to apply filters, it does all the maths for you. So there's a lot lower risk of having errors in your calculations as well. So that's it from me. Hope you found it useful, and thanks for joining us.